everybody. It is time once again for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
And Chip, we are in the dog days of the off-season for Ohio State football with, here as we are past the midway point in May, and we've got, way too many months left until the Buckeyes take the field again.
That's true, but the nice thing is that we are getting closer and closer to the annual tradition of college football magazines, ready to be consumed sometime by if not the end of the month, at the beginning of June.
Yeah, I wonder how that industry has handled because I haven't read them in a while. I used to when I was a kid. I used to get them all the time. I used to get every single one I could get my hands on. With the internet, I don't feel the need to do that as much anymore, but I wonder how they've handled the transfer season, in terms of trying to be as accurate and as up-to-date as possible, because it's not always easy to do that. We're going to be segueing into some transfer talk ourselves. How have you experienced these magazines dealing with this?
That's a really good point. I think most publications, I would guess, you see, I realize I just said that you'll start to see some of them at the beginning of June, possibly even at the end of May. I think a lot of publications will probably try to delay publishing too soon because of the advent of the transfer portal being more and more prominent. But yeah, it's a really good point.
Well, you're with Athlon. When do they roll those Athlon books out?
Those are coming out. That's the thing. Like Athlon, okay. They are making no bones about, hey, you can start ordering them now, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, it's not, I don't get me wrong. Like, I know I'm speaking to you from Ohio, and the weather, is different. Like we actually have, cooler weather right now. It's probably in the high 60s. It's actually very comfortable, but I'm not even thinking about college football, like sitting out in the sun with a beer in hand and perusing a magazine until, probably like July, like you said, like kind of like, oh, like I'm really itching for some news. And it's like, to have it right now just seems very, very premature, but I'm sure, I guess that's where the market is.
I think I started getting those. It must have been the first year Earl Bruce was head coach at Ohio State, because I think the first one I bought had Art Schlichter on the cover.
So was that a Sports Illustrated one?
I don't think so. I think it was maybe it was like a Phil Steele type thing.
Well, Phil Steele didn't come around until, I want to say it was in the 1980s. I know that Tom Orr has had Phil Steele on, so I'd have to look up.
It was not that one, but it was kind of done in the same vein. I don't remember exactly.
Maybe like Street and Smith, maybe.
Yeah.
That was old school.
Yeah, it probably was Street and Smith. Now that you mentioned it, that's ringing some bells, setting some alarm bells off. Maybe I'll go online and see if I can find that issue, and maybe I'll order it just to have it. It's not the same one. Yeah, it's not the same one, but at least it'll be a nice memento. Maybe I can frame it, throw it on a wall or something. Although, Art didn't turn out to be a terribly wonderful human being in the end.
No, he did not.
Addiction is not a good thing, and it makes you do really bad things. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move on. Let's get to our we alluded to it, transfer talk. Tyreek Johnson, cornerback, entered the transfer portal. There are no crystal balls currently predicting where he's going, according to 247 Sports, which I'm on right now. This is a kid from Jacksonville who came in with a lot of hoopla, a lot of promise. This was a highly prized recruit out of the state of Florida, and now he's headed elsewhere. And it seems like in a year when you look at that cornerback's position at Ohio State and Tyreek Johnson is heading elsewhere, that's really kind of sums up his entire Ohio State career.
Precisely. I think when you think, as you said, his recruiting hype profile never really translated into on-field productivity or success. And I just mentioned Tom Orr. He and Gerd, when they were referring to Tyreek Johnson's departure, I think one of the things that I think was quite telling is the fact that Demario Mccall, who is a beloved favorite of the fans, in terms of another player who was very hyped recruiting wise, was moved from running back to defensive back in the spring. And, Gerd and Tom summarized it best. The fact that Demario Mccall was playing ahead of him in the spring game on the depth chart kind of gave an idea in terms of where he ranked on, in terms of probably like future playing time options at Ohio State. So I wish Tyreek Johnson nothing but the best. But again, it's just sometimes it doesn't work out for whatever kind of reasons, scheme fit, whatever. It just, wherever his next destination is, I wish him nothing but the best.
Yeah, and you never really know what you're getting with any recruit because, while they try to do their due diligence and look into the each player's character and their personalities and whatnot, there's only so far you can go into that because, high schools want to get their kids recruited to high profile schools, and everybody kind of puts on their best face. Whenever they are, you go to a job interview, you're not telling everybody about all your flaws, right? So, I think this is, there are opportunities for kids that I think some kids come to college football and they see, something that's been easy their entire life because they're natural gifts suddenly isn't easy. Suddenly you have to do more. It's actually like work. You have to, the workout part of it, I don't think any of these kids mind, but I think, the film study and the preparation, I think it's an adjustment. It's kind of like when you are a student and you kind of skate through your whole high school years because everything kind of comes easy as long as you pay attention in class, maybe read the chapter or whatever, you just show up at the test and you ace it. And then you get into college and it's like, whoa, now we're talking about concepts. They're not like in black and white in the book. This isn't all multiple choice. I have to actually write essays and do stuff like that to show that I know what I'm talking about. And it's a whole nother world.
And like you said, I think, a lot of these recruits, and Tyreek Johnson's not the first, he won't be the last. A lot of them, as you said, they were able to be the best in their school, possibly in their state. Let's be honest. In terms of, just a lot of these players are just so naturally gifted that they have never, ever faced the level of competition that Ohio State is bringing in year after year, where you have to, regardless of whether we're talking defensive backs, wide receivers, offensive linemen, you name it, is that you have to go into that opportunity with the mindset that by and large, everybody that you're going up against is just as good, but probably not possibly, but probably better. And that's where that work ethic and that commitment. And again, I'm not implying that he didn't work hard because I genuinely don't know.
Right.
But that it's, that's sometimes it, like you said, I think it's a major adjustment. It's psychologically, very, very challenging for a lot of people to be faced with, for the first time in their life, a true obstacle that they really have to try to figure out how they're going to get around it.
Right, and I certainly never meant to imply that Tyreek was in that situation. It's just these are the kinds of things that can happen. I think back to my college experience. I'm out of my parents' house for the first time on my own. I didn't have study skills from high school because high school was very easy to me. And suddenly I found myself, really struggling to keep up in college. And I didn't know how to study because I had never had to study before. I kind of had to develop study habits, and it took me a while to catch up. And again, this is not necessarily what Tyreek Johnson's going through, but you see adjustments are always iffy. I mean, you see it in, kids that dominate in college for whatever reason don't work out in the NFL. You see soccer players that come over from other countries playing MLS, and they don't perform very well, or it takes them a long time to get going. Everything in life, when you're taken out of your fishbowl and putting in the big tank, it's an adjustment, and not everybody handles it the same way.
Very well said.
So whatever it was with Tyreek, again, whether it was scheme fit, whether it was attitude, whether it was study or work habits, or just not performing in practice, whatever those reasons were, he fell behind, and now he's transferring. And I feel like, Chip, I'm not sure if anybody's tracking this. Somebody's got to be tracking this. I feel like more of Ohio State's recruits from the state of Florida end up transferring than from any other state.
Well, that's part of why I think a lot of the critique of Urban Meyer when he was the head coach, that's not to imply that Jim Tressel didn't lose players to transfer from the state of Florida, or obviously like Ryan Day with Tyreek Johnson. But that when you think about like the recruiting philosophy of chasing after a player from a state that is far away, in this case, Florida, where we've been talking about the challenges and, not being able to necessarily dominate as the player may possibly be expecting, like the way that they did in high school. Well, is that player going to be likely to stick around when they're buried on the depth chart? And that's kind of where a lot of people are like, you might be better off with a kid from Ohio, in the sense that, and again, I'm not saying like, just recruit players from Ohio just for the sake of geography. But the idea that they might be a little bit more likely to stick it out, even if they're buried on the depth chart, because of the fact that they grew up rooting for Ohio State and they're more likely to, want to be associated with the program. Conversely, a player from Florida doesn't probably have the same level of allegiance to Ohio State. And when, those tough times do come and they're buried on the depth chart, they might be, the opportunity to get closer to home might be a little more appealing.
Right, and that's another part of that whole fishbowl, from the fishbowl to the fish tank thing comes in, is that, homesickness is a real thing, and it really does affect everybody differently, and sometimes just that can throw you off enough to where you're not getting playing time, and then that's kind of it just kind of snowballs. You the more you're not playing and you're not doing what you want to do, it makes the homesickness worse, and then that kind of is just this never-ending cycle. So you're right. The kids from further away certainly have more incentive to try to go closer to home if they're not getting playing time than the kids from Ohio, because the kids from Ohio at least are like, okay, well, at least I can drive home to Chillicothe on the weekend or whatever, wherever they might be from, and that's not something that the kids from Florida and Texas and California can do. But that's sort of the risk you run when you have a program like Ohio State's that can recruit on a national level and compete for the very top talent across the country.
And there are still a number of players from the great state of Florida on Ohio State's roster. So, again, Ohio State certainly is not going to stop recruiting players from Florida. I just think, I think you're onto something there that, it's you're running that risk if things don't go well. The possibility of them wanting to return to home, it's pretty high.
Yeah, I mean, I have lived in both states, and let me tell you, those days when the wind chill is down below zero and you're not playing, you're like, well, I could be in Florida right now.
Yeah, and you're not getting screamed at by Mickey Marotti at 6 a.m.
Exactly.
I'm sure like the idea of like glancing at, the hometown weather forecast and seeing, 60, 70, 80, like you said, versus below freezing. Yeah, it certainly could be very appealing.
Yeah, these kids getting selfies texted to them from the friends at the beach, and they're, you know, they're making their way to the Woody at 5 a.m. and they know that they're not going to see the field. But we wish Tyreek Johnson the best, and hopefully he'll land in a position that's, or in a spot that's good for him, and that he can maybe turn the corner and get his career back on track. Chip, we have another transfer to discuss. We know that Max Ray has transferred to Colorado. This was a kid who is from the state of Tennessee, Franklin, Tennessee. Same recruiting class, 2018, committed in April of 2017. And this is a kid who, he could start at Ohio State. He absolutely could start at Ohio State, but there's just so much talent on that line. And then you've got, guys coming back that maybe you didn't expect to come back for another year. So this is just a numbers game for him, and he's looking at his career kind of slipping away without getting on the field, and so he's going somewhere where he knows he can get playing time.
And Max Ray declared his intentions to transfer, I think, right at the onset of spring football. As you said, Max Ray certainly could play or start at Ohio State because he did. Now, granted, the circumstances were more so because of everything COVID related when Ohio State went up to East Lansing to play Michigan State. Out of necessity, Max Ray filled in and by all accounts graded out a champion, did very, very well. And I think probably in the back of his mind, he's probably thinking, all right, this is going to have me in good position going into spring ball, but maybe somewhere after the Michigan State game during the bowl game preparations, conversations were had about the upcoming season for 2021, and that he was basically told, all right, out of, the depth chart, you would rank somewhere, here, and wherever that number would possibly be on the depth chart wasn't to his liking. And he entered the transfer portal. Now he's off to Colorado. Similar to Tyreek Johnson, wish him nothing but the best. He demonstrated that he could play at Ohio State. This, as you described it, it certainly is an opportunity for him to play more frequently than he would have for the Buckeyes this season.
Yeah, it's a shame because I think there's a chance that this doesn't happen if Thayer Munford declares for the draft. Now, that it's great that Thayer Munford is coming back and playing another year, but for Max Ray, he's looking for opportunities, and that's one opportunity that went away when Thayer Munford decided to come back. So it's not a problem for Ohio State. Ohio State has good numbers. They have a lot of talent on that line looking to get in the lineup. It's not as big a problem as losing a depth cornerback is, because corner is a real position of concern for Ohio State.
I agree. I think, like you said, there are certain positions on Ohio State's football team where depth is more of a priority. So like you just said, the defensive backfield is certainly not awash with, a ton of depth, and let's face it, a lot of experience. And the fact that both players, we were talking previously about Tyreek Johnson, in this case, Max Ray, I think with the offensive line, there is a lot of depth and a lot of experience coming back. So I think both players are making decisions that is in their collective best interests.
Yeah, well, at least we know where Max Ray is headed. We don't know yet where Tyreek Johnson will land, but that's something we'll talk about on a future show. Let's talk about a transfer to Ohio State that did not happen. There were very strong vibes that Tennessee linebacker Henry To'oTo'o would choose Ohio State, but in the end he chooses to go to Alabama. And this is kind of a sort of good news, bad news, I guess, for Ohio State, because while they certainly wouldn't mind having a guy who was starting in the SEC to come in, in a year that they're replacing everybody, this is a guy who wouldn't have been coming in until, the late summer, or the summer camp before the fall season. And, would he have been able to learn the playbook, get up to speed, get out on the field and perform at a high level without having to do too much thinking, which of course slows down the play. It's possible that he wouldn't have been able to do that. And also, one thing that, you mentioned, Tom Orr and Tony Gerdeman, that they talked about is it's also a thing that where if you just hand somebody a job that comes in off the street, even if they did have accomplishments elsewhere, they weren't grinding it out every day in practice, and that could build resentment and a little bit of a schism in the locker room amongst the position group, and you don't want that. So while, it's great to have a talented guy who can make plays, come in and help your program, it's a very short-term solution with somebody who's been around, and it's also, there are pitfalls there that Ohio State will now avoid because he went to Alabama instead.
I like that term, pitfalls. I certainly come down on the side of Gerd as you described it when he and Tom were discussing this. I think, and another good term that you used a moment ago, schism, the idea that about this possibly causing issues within the locker room. And maybe I'm naive. I certainly respect Kirk Barton, who as a former player, he described it as, all right, if you want to be on the field, play better. When Tom Orr was discussing this very topic with Kirk Barton, and I respect that. I completely understand where he's coming from. But I think when it comes to the linebackers that are on the roster, like Dallas Gant, who did not participate in the spring due to a foot injury, and by all accounts, Dallas Gant should be ready to go for the fall camp and ready for the 2021 season. The fact that Ohio State is going to be down a traditional linebacker spot due to the emergence of the bullet in the defensive scheme. So instead of having traditional 4-3 going to that 4-2-5 look, where possibly Craig Young, maybe Ronnie Hickman playing that bullet. So that means that there's only the two linebackers. I think bringing in as good of a player as Henry 2020 could have been for Ohio State, I'm going to come down on the side of it being more of a disruptive presence within the locker room. As you said, why are we handing the position to this guy who just showed up versus the players here who have been putting in all the hard work? And that's not to say that maybe Henry 2020 wouldn't have shown that he was worthy of the starting position. I just think I would lean more towards Dallas Gant, Tommy Eichenberg, some of the other linebackers being on the field instead of Henry 2020, who, as you said a moment ago, might not have been as welcomed or as embraced by his new teammates in coming in and just being handed a starting position.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen flashes from Dallas Gant late in games when he's gotten on the field. In lopsided games, we've seen him make some tremendous plays. Guys that have been backing up the likes of Tuff Borland and Pete Werner, who were not widely beloved by a lot of Buckeye fans. Those are the guys that they've been waiting to see. So I think kind of this ends up working out pretty much for everyone. And I don't know if this young man will go to Alabama and become a starter. It's possible that he won't, but it's possible that he will. But either way, I think Ohio State's in decent position here, and I think that it's not going to be something that Ryan Day is going to lose any sleep over.
Again, I think the talent is there on the roster. It's just with the new scheme that 4-2-5, I think you're already down a linebacker spot. I think, Taraja Mitchell, I think is pretty much, I don't want to say a lock, but a strong favorite to be playing one of them. So I think Dallas Gant has shown, as you said, from time to time, he's flashed later in games. I think it would make more sense to stick with the players that are on the roster who have been here, who truly have bought into that concept of the brotherhood, so to speak, than bringing in somebody that it could have been more of a disruptive presence than originally bargained for.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys transferring out of the program, guys not transferring into the program, these could be seen as negatives, but we've got positive news too. We're going to have some positive things to talk about right after we break for a moment, right now. And we're back, Chip, and we've got a little bit more, upbeat news, little stuff that won't aggravate anybody, I guess, is a good way to put it. Let us start with a guy who, we were all kind of surprised didn't get an extra year at Ohio State, and that's CJ Saunders, when his 6 year of eligibility was denied, but he got invited to minicamp with the Falcons. I think this is tremendous news, and even if nothing comes of it, just the opportunity for CJ Saunders to go to an NFL minicamp and have an opportunity to show what he can do, I think is just a great story.
I completely agree. I was surprised that CJ Saunders did not get that extra year of eligibility, but I'm very happy for him that no matter how this turns out with Atlanta, and I haven't seen any news after, the initial reporting of the opportunity to go to the Falcons minicamp. I haven't seen anything recently, but I think CJ Saunders is one of those guys. I mean, he kind of was, and this is meant just kind of off the top of my head, one of those players that I think Ohio State fans gravitated to, kind of like he was almost a more recent version of Dane Sonzenbacher. You know what I mean? Like one of those just real reliable receivers that it seemed as though when he was given the opportunity to play, certainly performed well. It was unfortunate that his last years at Ohio State were marred by injury, but I'm certainly wishing nothing but the best for him in his attempts to play professionally with Atlanta.
Yeah, well, you just got on my good side, too, because I am an unabashed Dane Sonsenbacher fanboy.
Well, Dane Sonsenbacher was clutch when he was one of these guys that I remember. We were talking earlier about the recruiting and things like that, and say what you will about the Jim Tressel era, that, sometimes scholarships would be handed out to players, and they weren't necessarily like the big name national recruits, but Dane Sonsenbacher, coming out of the Toledo area, was just a dependable clutch receiver. And he's remembered at a time, during the latter years of Jim Tressel's tenure, very fondly.
Yeah, I always thought he was a kid who had a chance to maybe he could have probably played as a possession slot receiver for Bill Belichick. I think the world of that kid. I loved watching him play, and I have nothing but fond memories of him. And I think you're right. I think CJ Saunders has a little bit of that Dane Sonsenbacher in him. He obviously didn't have the opportunities to get on the field as much. Some of that was injury related. Some of that was just incredible teammates that he was, not able to get ahead on the depth chart for obvious reasons. But it just the fact that he gets to go to an NFL camp of any kind. I mean, how many human beings can say that they've had that life experience? I mean, even if nothing comes of it, this is a fantastic experience for him.
And as you said, it's basically, that opportunity of a lifetime. We'll see what comes of it. It might not necessarily translate into an opportunity to play at the next level, but as you said, this is something that very few people ever get the opportunity. I'm glad that he's embracing this opportunity with, everything he possibly can.
Yeah. I mean, if I were a college football player, I'd be one of those guys that I would try to play anywhere, wherever I could until people told me I couldn't play anymore. Canada or the indoor game or, something.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm glad that you just brought up Canada. I was going to say one of Dane Sonsenbacher's teammates that was in the wide receiver room during his time, DeVere Posey. To the best of my knowledge, DeVere Posey was actively playing in the Canadian League. I'm not sure, with everything COVID related like last year, but after his career in the NFL, he went up to Canada and was doing well. So I think, I'm not sure if he's still playing, but I mean, it wouldn't be surprising if he was.
Yeah, the wiki page says he is a professional gridiron football wide receiver for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So they haven't say it. They don't say he's a free agent. So I don't know if it's an up-to-date wiki page, but he has been with the Hamilton Ticats since 2020, according to Wikipedia. So good for him. I thought DeVere Posey could play in the NFL, and he bounced around a little bit for a few years before heading north. So he has played for a few teams up there as well. And like I said, I would, if it were me, I would just play as long as I could, until somebody comes along and says, "Look, kid, you can't play anymore." Or, there's just your talents don't translate. I would then I would go get a real job, because Chip, I mean, even if you love your real jobs are terrible.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. There's nothing inaccurate about that statement.
All right. So good luck to CJ Saunders. And if that's already taken place and we're a little behind, we apologize. But I haven't seen anything either. I wasn't sure when that camp was taking place. But we'll try to get word, and we'll try to see what happened. And
just a quick interjection. I just thought of something, and this was something that I did not know until this past weekend. Is Johnny Dixon I'm not sure if he's going to be brought to training camp, but he participated in the Cleveland Browns rookie mini camp this past weekend. So there's another guy who's trying to take full advantage of an opportunity.
Yeah, there you go. Good luck to both of those young men. Another young man who has a whole career ahead of him, it would seem, is center Josh Myers. Now he's now under contract as of May 14th? It was a couple of days ago.
Yeah, something like that.
So 4 years, $5.5 million, a little bit over $5.5 million, with almost $3 million of that guaranteed. Signing bonus of $1.4 million, a base salary $660,000 guaranteed. That's not bad money. I'll take it.
That's kind of where that's kind of the difference between what you just said about how like real life jobs suck. This would be an example. This would be an example of like why playing a game and getting that kind of money is why it's like, yeah, in comparison, yeah, real life jobs suck when you're making that kind of money. I often say this, and I'm not sure if Kirk Barton listens to our podcast, but I mean this with all respect to Kirk, is that the one thing that I would hope every Ohio State NFL draft choice possibly does is that they get an opportunity to talk to Kirk about what to do when it comes to your rookie year, because the story, the saga of Kirk Barton about the various places where he lived throughout his 1 year in the NFL, bouncing around, and all the different apartments about what to do and what not to do when it comes to living arrangements. That now I think Josh Myers, on the other hand, being a second round draft choice, is going to have a little bit more longevity than Kirk did, being a later draft choice. But that's the one thing that I often tell people is I often think like Kirk Barton, his saga of broken leases and apartments and things of that nature because he was cut or traded or signed by these different teams. Just everything about that. I always think, like that's the guy you should talk to about what you should do for living arrangements when you're a rookie in the NFL.
There you go. Josh Myers, I made light of his salary being, not bad, but I mean, I do not begrudge an offensive lineman making as much money as they possibly can, because what they have to do for a living is insane. I mean, you have to block very, very large, very, very fast individuals who are trying to get by you and doing everything they can to get by you, and it's it's a difficult job. I think it's one of the most difficult jobs in professional sports. So get all you can, Josh.
Certainly. And while you're up there, enjoy your cheese curds, because I hear that they're amazing in Wisconsin.
Yeah, so maybe he'll be the Corey Linsley replacement in Green Bay and become the new starter, and maybe that'll just be a thing. Green Bay will always have an Ohio State center starting.
Well, let's just hope that Josh is as productive as Corey Linsley was, and he's got a strong hold on that position for several years before the Packers come to Columbus to find his replacement.
Indeed. All right. Let's see. Another good story is that you remember Nate Ebner.
I do remember Nate Ebner.
Nate Ebner was I'm going to call it a surprise. This is a kid who, he had an okay career at Ohio State, but was, when he was drafted, it was kind of like nobody really thought that he would stick around, but he went on to have a fantastic career with the New England Patriots. Won multiple Super Bowls. He's been to the Olympics with the rugby team. He wrote a book called Finishing Strong, and so he's gone from an OSU walk-on to NFL champion and Olympic rugby player, and now he's written a book called Finishing Strong. Are you a big reader, Chip?
I usually try to, more so in the off season. I'm not going to lie. During, we're talking about how the like right now is kind of like there's not a lot of news as it relates to college football. So I should try and pick that up. So that would be. It sounds like a very inspiring story.
Yeah, this sounds to me like something that would be a great read. And Nate Ebner he's a great story just because, like I said, he's a walk-on. He came to Ohio State as a walk-on. He was a great special teamer. He ends up in the NFL, and you think, okay, well, they need special teams guys in the NFL. He ends up becoming a guy that just plugs in, even starts games, and is effective. And, it's a tribute to him, and it's also a tribute to Bill Belichick, recognizing what he has in a Nate Ebner and seeing that potential, because I tell you, probably most of the league wouldn't have even given Nate Ebner the time of day.
Oh, certainly. And you mentioned Nate Ebner, his background with the Olympics and rugby. I'm not sure if you've ever seen a very popular coffee mug where it has the sign for, basically like for, donating blood. It says, like donate blood, play rugby.
Yeah.
Like that. I'm just saying, like, anyone who plays rugby is tough. And the fact that, as you quite accurately stated, the fact that Nate Ebner, his claim to fame was being a special teams player. And that's, I'm not disagreeing with you about how difficult it is to play on the offensive line, but, to make your name solely and exclusively as a special teams, I don't want to say demon, but, like you have to be kind of a reckless abandon, running down full speed with the collisions that are on kickoffs and punt returns and things of that nature, for him to, that's probably the fact that he did it so well. As you said, it was a surprise when he was drafted, but the fact that he was able to carve out a successful career with the Patriots, arguably the best team in the NFL for a number of years under Bill Belichick, who is notorious for, I can speak as a Cleveland Browns fan, notorious for just saying, okay, this guy has it or they don't, not having too much sentimentality about letting people go. The fact that he kept Nate Ebner around for a number of years, I think, speaks volumes about the kind of football player Nate Ebner was during his NFL career.
Yeah, a 6th round pick. He ends up playing 7 years with the Patriots. Also went to the Giants in 2020. I think he was the perfect guy for special teams because, he's a rugby guy. And so running down the field and hit someone as hard as you can is kind of what he does. And now you've got pads on. Now it's easy for him.
I guess, I don't know. All I could say is that I mean, it's anytime that I've seen rugby or anything like on ESPN or any kind of sports, it just there's no shortage of players walking around with blood of like dripping from like their nose or other areas of their body. Like I said, they have a reckless disregard for their safety. So yeah, Nate Ebner, like I said, I think he fulfilled his role on special teams quite well.
Yeah, I once had the shirt that said "Give blood, play hockey." So it's another sport where they talk about that a little bit. But yeah, so finishing strong is the name of the book. I imagine you get it on Amazon and any of the normal book stores and whatnot. But yeah, that's something that sounds interesting, and it seems like it'll be worth picking up. So I will probably be doing that. Chip, I think you probably will as well, because it's always good to have some reading material, especially for the off season.
Absolutely.
All right, so I guess we could. That's really all I wanted to talk about this week. Do you want to get into this hire for the Pac-12, the commissioner of the Pac-12? They got a new commissioner. I don't really know much about him. I take it that a lot of other people don't really know that much about him. Do you want to get into it? Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
We could just, very briefly, and that is, I just the reason I threw that out as a possible topic is the fact, as you said, like the new commissioner of the Pac-12, everything that I have read about him is it's not a traditional hire, and I compare and contrast that to, as Ohio State fans, as Big Ten fans, what we all collectively experienced last year with another non-traditional hire, and that is the hiring of Kevin Warren. So it just seems as though college football is going a different route than what you or I or other college football fans have grown accustomed to, and that is, for all of Jim Delaney's faults and failings as the Big Ten commissioner, the one thing that I think really kind of set him apart was the fact that he did play college sports. A lot of people forget that he did play basketball at North Carolina. That he, kind of, again, I'm not saying that he always did everything right, but the fact that he had kind of almost more of a different mindset than what we're seeing nowadays with these new hires, where they're coming in, like the new Pac-12 commissioner is coming in with a background in entertainment, and so kind of like with the mindset of, all right, well, let's try to improve the Pac-12's television exposure, and there's already speculation about, are they going to try to possibly move the headquarters from San Francisco to Las Vegas, and everything that Big Ten fans dealt with last year, the frustrations with Kevin Warren. So that's all I wanted, is just to kind of throw it out there, is that it just seems as though college football is moving from the experience of having a commissioner with playing experience to more of, all right, what is their background in legal or entertainment venues, to kind of, treat this more like a business rather than a sport.
Yeah, so this guy's name is George Kliavkoff. Am I saying that right?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Kliavkoff? I don't know. Kliavkoff? I don't know. Again, we didn't know much about him. But again, you say non-traditional hire. You say that the Big Ten already had a non-traditional hire. What does the Pac-12 like to do, Chip? It likes to do whatever the Big Ten is doing.
That's a very good point. And if there's anything that I can only hope is that Kevin Warren has learned from his mistakes of year one. I saw recently that his son, who was playing for Mississippi State, recently transferred to Michigan State. So now he is in the Big Ten footprint, and is now, I can only hope that Kevin Warren, coming from the Minnesota Vikings as a, kind of like a legal person, that he's going to have a better pulse, finger on the pulse of the collective best things for the Big Ten. I mean, we're we're turning the corner in terms of everything COVID related, and I don't want to be, too overly optimistic, but it seems as though, all right, that we'll be able to have fans in the stands. And it just seemed like last year Kevin Warren did everything wrong and just never really recovered from that. If you're saying that, and I'm not disagreeing with you, that the Pac-12 is trying to be like the Big Ten, I would say, hey, learn from the mistakes of from the Big Ten and don't follow everything, because not everything necessarily went smoothly that first year.
Yeah, well, I mean, they try to emulate the Big Ten, but they don't always pull it off. Like, they don't compete for the college football playoff every year. It's like, they try, but it's not like they do.
The new commissioner is going to, has publicly stated that he wants to see playoff expansion. I mean, the reason why we're not talking about it is because nothing's been announced yet. I mean, like, for us to say, oh, it's going to be 8 teams or 12 teams. I mean, it's pure speculation on our part. Like, we really don't know, until we get the official word, then we can kind of argue about, like, they should have done this or it's like until something is conclusive, we really don't know. But I guess my point, the reason why I wanted to bring it up is that, again, a non-traditional hire, I think, the way that things are shaking up as it relates to playoff expansion, name, image, and likeness is coming down the pike, all these different things. I think it bears watching to see how conferences like the Big Ten, like the Pac-12, all these other conferences across the country, how they're going to handle this, because, again, the business of college sports is only growing, and I think you need to have people who have a good finger on the pulse and direction of where things are headed.
Yeah, I agree. There's so much smoke with the expansion talk that there almost certainly has to be some fire. But of course, without knowing what that looks like, all we can do is speculate and weigh the pros and cons of this number or that number, or if the group of 5 should be automatically included. All that stuff is for another day and another show, when we have more information. But I think it's, if you ask me, I think it's happening probably sooner rather than later, just based on the talk that's been out there, and people that don't normally talk about this or don't want to talk about this are suddenly talking about it. So it seems like it's going to happen. I guess one other thing we could mention is that we know when the Oregon game will take place. It's going to be a big nude Saturday game.
I was surprised at that one, but then again, from what I understand, Fox, when they made the announcement on Colin Cowherd, that I guess they're really banking on the idea that they're going to have fans watching college football starting at noon, with Ohio State, Oregon, like to commemorate the whole 20th anniversary of 9/11. That's going to parlay into watching baseball that night. And I, for one, I realize that this might be sacrilegious. I'm just not as much of a baseball doesn't really hold me. So I'm kind of surprised that Fox thinks that they're going to have a bigger audience for baseball at night than they would have for college football at night. But that's their decision.
Yeah, and I think really that this is a move by Fox to own a specific thing, just kind of the same way they said, you know what, we're going to embrace these conferences that are not getting the love from the other media outlets, and they built a base out of that, and this is the same thing. It's like, well, everybody else is competing against each other in prime time. Why don't we just own this one time slot and it'll be ours? And it was a risky business move, but I think it's ended up being a good one for them.
It certainly has. I think when you think of, it's not just the Oregon game. Obviously, the game was announced as Fox. I think that's their number one draft choice every year, is the game at the end of November. That's going to be a noon game.
Yep.
So that one, I mean, that's more traditional. Let's face it. I mean, you're talking about two programs that are in the same geographic footprint. Having it at noon makes sense, especially when you never know what the weather can be like. I mean, it gets dark like by around like 4:30 in the afternoon around that time of year anyway. So that makes sense. The fact that for Oregon, it's kind of a advantage for Ohio State. I mean, the players, their body clocks are going to be at 9 a.m. When when that ball kicks off on September 11th. I mean, I'm sure that Oregon will be practicing, but I'm sure it's still going to be kind of a slight shock to the system to be playing football when your body feels like it's still like 9 a.m. back home in Oregon.
Yeah, and it's not a bad thing to have their defensive backs and linebackers be, a half a second slow, when you've got a first-year starting quarterback either.
Not at all. And considering that whoever that first year starting quarterback is, because we don't know, keep in mind that they're only going to be making their second start. Incidentally, the Minnesota game, that the kickoff time hasn't been established yet. Fox is also going to be televising that on September 2nd, and that will be, I'm guessing, at the latest it would be at 8:00. I'm thinking it might even be a 7:00 kickoff, just considering it is a Thursday night going into Labor Day weekend. We'll see, but that is another Fox game as well.
Yeah. So, take the Friday off before Labor Day so you can stay up and watch Buckeyes in case they have a late start time.
Especially when you have a job that sucks.
Exactly. Yeah. So hopefully my bosses aren't not listening to this podcast. But I think compared to playing professional football, probably most jobs do suck.
That's right.
So anyway, Chip, anything else on your mind this week? You want to talk? You want to get into this little public outcry about noon games? Because I don't really have an opinion. The games are when they are. Give me the schedule. Let me know when they are, and then I'll go and watch the games at that time. When I was a student, I certainly liked the later games better. Let's have an afternoon game so I could sleep in. I don't have to get up early, and then I can start pre-gaming at a reasonable hour.
Yeah, count me in that group that I don't see it as something worthy of an outcry per se. I prefer actually, again, I prefer probably like the 3:30 kickoff, because again, it's the kind of thing where, especially with, having kids in sports, like usually their events are done by,
right.
So that way it's like, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about like rushing home kind of a thing. But again, my kids are getting older, so that's not as much of an issue. And then as much as I've enjoyed the night games at Ohio Stadium, I would be the first one to admit, sleeping or being up that late. And even though most of the time I'm doing it from the confines of my home, like being able to, not be up until, I know you're watching Hawaii and all that, until
yes.
Whatever, I'm usually, I'm starting to, around like 11 o'clock, I'm like, okay, I need to get to bed. So, it's not a big deal to me. I understand where some people, again, you don't have as much time to tailgate, but it's not a big deal to me at all.
Yeah, now the Buckeyes, whether they're on at noon or the 3:30 game or at night, people watch the Buckeyes. People watch them from all across the country. They are a ratings juggernaut. People tune in to watch them. Whether they are cheering for them or cheering against them, nobody's ignoring Ohio State. So it really doesn't matter when they're on. They're going to get their due. I kind of like some aspects of when they play early, some aspects of when they play late. Work in other ways. So they everything kind of balances out. So I don't really have a big, strong opinion. I used to really hate the noon games, but a little older, a little wiser, a little more mellow, and I don't have a problem with them anymore. Anything else, Chip, before we sign off on this edition of the Silver Bullets?
No, I guess the only thing I would say is that, in a couple weeks, we might know even more kickoff times, because it's usually, like around the Memorial Day weekend that you start to hear more and more early season kickoff times being announced. So we might even know more Ohio State kickoffs by the next time we record.
Yeah. So anyway, we've pretty much talked about all the topics we had. Certainly there are some other things that are kind of on the back burner for when there's some slow weeks. But for now, we'll call this edition done and dusted. Chip, where can folks find you on the internet?
I can be found on the internet on Twitter at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. As Michael said earlier in the podcast, I do serve as a contributor to Athlon Sports. I haven't written an article recently, but I wouldn't be surprised if Athlon asked me to write an article in the near future, kind of analyzing and assessing Ohio State's schedule or something along those lines. So that's where I can be found on the internet.
All right, you can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan, and I am the grumpy old Buckeye at Buckeye Scoop. You won't find me there until the season starts, but you can certainly look back at last year's schedule. If you didn't see any of those grumpy old Buckeye columns, you can read, what made me run out on my lawn and, shake my fist at the sky and yell at clouds and all of that stuff. That's kind of my thing, and so enjoy if you do that, and if not, I don't know, enjoy Arby's, I guess.
If you must. I'm not a big Arby's fan, so there we go. We have a difference of opinion.
Chip, it's been a pleasure being your friend over the years. I'm sorry it had to come to an end like this.
All right.
But yeah, that's. I don't think we're compatible anymore. Irreconcilable differences, man. All right, well, that will do it for this episode of the Silver Bullets podcast. And if you are so inclined to listen to this podcast, you might like all of the other Buckeye Scoop Radio Network podcasts. I don't know. Are we calling it a radio network, or is it a podcast network?
I want to say that we call it a radio network, but I'm probably getting that one wrong too.
It has nothing to do with the radio, but it's probably called that.
Right.
Its official name escapes me, but there's a great podcast on all the time. You won't even be able to keep up with all of them, so don't even try. You could try, but you got the Morning Scoop Monday through Friday with Tom Orr. Always has great guests on. Chip and I still have not been asked on, so that tells you that they have really good quality guests. And you can catch Tom also with Tony Gerdeman on Buckeye Weekly, which is not a weekly show, as the title would suggest. They come out at least twice a week, and they do extra shows for their Patreon subscribers. And there's Scoop World Order with Kirk Barton, and there's Gibbs and the Bank, and all kinds of other shows, Buckeye Sloopcast. There's something for everybody, so check them all out. You can go to the podcast section at BuckeyeScoop.com and find one that you like. But don't leave us for another podcast. You have to keep us at least on the side.
Please.
If you haven't subscribed to Buckeye Scoop and become an insider, you probably should do that if you are a big fan of Ohio State football and you like to get your information behind the scenes. It's a great way to get behind the scenes info that's not being talked about, or get stuff early before it actually gets announced. Chip and I find out stuff there all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like kind of what we were talking about earlier about some of the different concerns we had about possibly bringing in a linebacker transfer. Like those kind of thoughts certainly were shared sentiments, at least.
Yep. So without any further ado, we will wish you a good week. We'll be back in 2 weeks. So I guess we'll wish you a good 2 weeks. And we'll be back next time. So the only thing left for us to do is what we always do at the end and say, Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!